Welcome back. We're going through 4chan threads tonight that are genuinely disturbing. The kind people delete and never speak about. These stories are real. Hit like, subscribe, lights off, and let's get into it. The donation arrived at the gallery in the second week of October in a crate the size of a small car with a blueprint taped to the top and no return address, just a name on the shipping label, a state of A vessel, and a Chelsea P.O. box that turned out to belong to nobody when I called. I run a private space off West 24th between an architecture office and one of those juice bars that opens and closes every 6 months. Not a big gallery, one main room, one back room, one office. The kind of place that survives because a few collectors on the Upper East Side like the owner and keep him afloat. The blueprint was hand-drawn. That was the first thing I noticed. Not a CAD file, not a PDF, actual pencil on tracing paper, with measurements in millimeters and small notes in a language I didn't recognize. Maybe Romanian, maybe not. 72 mirrors, listed by dimension, with a placement grid overlaid on the floor of a room that matched my main room almost exactly. Whoever sent it had been in the gallery, or had the floor plan. I should have flagged that. I didn't. Anonymous donations are more common than people think, the paperwork was clean, and my boss was already texting me from Miami saying, "Put it up, we'll figure out attribution later." So I did. It took me 4 days to install alone. The mirrors ranged from about the size of a paperback to floor to ceiling. Every one of them was mounted on a matte black steel frame, heavy, cold to the touch even after sitting in the crate. The blueprint gave exact angles, down to fractions of a degree. I used a laser level and a protractor from a hardware store on 8th. My back hurt every night. I got pain on my jeans that wouldn't come out. The whole space smelled like cold metal by the end of it, and coffee, because I was drinking 3 or 4 cups a day to keep going. When I finished, on a Thursday, I stood in the middle. It's a common effect. You put 2 mirrors facing each other, you get an infinite corridor. Multiply that by 72, angled with intent, and you get something else. You get depth in every direction. You look down at your feet, and there's a version of you falling away below the floor. Look up, another one climbing. Turn your head, and 1,000 of you turn with it. Beautiful, honestly. My boss was going to lose his mind over the photos. I raised my right hand. 1,000 right hands went up with me. Then I noticed her. Not immediately. It took me maybe 10 seconds to catch it, and even then, I thought it was my eyes tired from the install. Somewhere deep in the corridor, past the 3rd or 4th mirror, one of the reflections was slow. Not by much. Half a second, maybe less. I lowered my hand. The far one lowered a beat later. I did it again. Same thing. I stepped out of the installation and drank a glass of water at my desk and thought, okay, that's an optical thing. That's a refraction thing. Light bouncing 72 times has to travel, right? Except light travels fast enough that 72 bounces across a 15-foot room is instantaneous for a human eye. I know that. I minored in physics before I switched to art history. I went back in. This time I stood very still and only moved my head. Slowly, left, then right. The near reflections tracked me. The far ones, 6 or 7 layers deep, lagged. I could see it if I focused. There was a version of me at the end of the corridor who was still facing forward when I was already looking at the wall. I called the guy who does our framing and mirror work, a Ukrainian on 29th who's been in the trade longer than I've been alive. Let's call him Yuri, because that's not his name, but close enough. He came over the next morning with a case of instruments and spent 3 hours in the installation, measured every mirror, checked the silvering, checked the glass thickness. Nothing. Standard consumer-grade mirrors, he said. Some Chinese, some Mexican. All ordinary. I asked him about the delay. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Show me." I showed him. I raised my arm and waved. He stood behind me and watched. Then he did it himself, and I stood at the door and watched him. When he came out, he was quiet. He was not a quiet man normally. He packed up his tools and said, "Ordinary mirrors. Bill in the mail." And he left. We opened the show that Saturday. My boss flew back from Miami just for it. The card by the door said, "Untitled, Artist Unknown, 2022, Mixed Media, courtesy of a private estate." People loved it. Instagram loved it. A critic from an online magazine called it the most physical piece of the season, whatever that means. For the first 2 weeks, I stayed away from the center of it. I told myself I was just tired and that a room full of mirrors will play tricks on anyone. I ran the gallery from my desk. I let visitors go in alone. Then the email started. The first one came from a woman who had visited on a Tuesday. She wrote a long, careful message about how much she'd enjoyed the piece, and then at the bottom, almost apologetically, she asked if there was a video component. She said that while she was standing in the middle, one of the far reflections had moved when she wasn't moving. She wanted to know if it was a projection. I told her it wasn't. I said the mirrors sometimes catch other visitors from odd angles. She thanked me and said that made sense. The second email came a week later. A guy this time. He said the same thing, only he'd been alone in the room. He said his reflection at the end of the corridor had turned its head. He hadn't. He was very clear about that. He'd been staring straight ahead. The third one worried me more. It came from a photographer who'd stopped by after hours as a favor to my boss. He'd taken a long exposure from the middle of the room. Every mirror had captured his outline as a soft blur, the way long exposures do. Except one. In a far mirror, his outline was sharp, frozen, like it had held still while he was moving. By the end of November, I had 7 of them. 7 separate people, 7 separate visits. None of them knew each other. None of them had read the other's messages. Everyone described a version of the same thing, a far reflection that did not do what they were doing. It scratched its face, it looked down, it smiled. One of them, a woman in her 60s who owned a bookshop in Brooklyn, said her reflection had put a finger to its lips. I didn't tell my boss. I didn't tell anyone. I stayed out of the room. 3 months in, on a Sunday when the gallery was closed, I went in one more time. I wanted to see if it was still happening. I stood in the middle, and I raised my hand, and I watched the far end of the corridor. She raised her hand a second before I did. That's what did it. I called the crew on Monday, and had the whole thing down by Wednesday. Every mirror wrapped, every frame boxed. I told my boss the loan had been recalled. He was annoyed for a day, and then he forgot about it. The blueprint I burned in the sink in the back room. I broke up the ashes with a fork and washed them down the drain. I don't know who sent it or where the pieces are now. The crates went to a storage facility in New Jersey under a false invoice number, and I have never once looked up the address, and I never will. If anyone asks, the show never happened. Most of the money I look at is boring. That is the whole point of the job. You want boring. When something interesting shows up on your screen at a compliance desk on Wall Street, it means someone is about to have a very bad month, and once or twice a year, that someone is you. I work at a mid-tier audit firm on the 34th floor of a building near the harbor. Open plan, decent screens, $7 coffee downstairs. What we actually do is look at other people's money moving from A to B and decide if it looks clean. The file came in mid-November 2022, flagged low priority. Private wealth review, referred by a partner bank in Zurich, standard KYC refresh. I opened it on a Monday because Mondays are for the boring ones. Client was a private individual. I'll call him R because that was the first letter of his given name, and I still don't love writing the whole thing out. His inbound transactions looked completely normal on the first pass. Money coming in from a logistics firm in Rotterdam. Small amounts, monthly, invoice-based, tax paid, everything reconciled. If I had signed off there, I would have closed the file in an hour and gone to lunch. I didn't sign off because I got curious about the logistics firm. The Rotterdam company had one customer that year that made up almost all of its revenue, a commodities broker registered in Malta. The broker's books were in English, filed on time, audited by a name I recognized. Their single largest supplier was a shipping agent in Limassol. The shipping agent was owned by a holding company in the British Virgin Islands. The BVI holding drew almost all of its funds from a fintech licensed in Singapore. The fintech's largest counterparty for the year was a trading company in Dubai. The Dubai company had one significant client, a consultancy in Astana, and the consultancy's biggest payer that quarter was a family office in Liechtenstein, 7 jurisdictions, every one of them legal, everyone with a real office and a website that actually loaded. I checked. I even called the Singapore fintech's public line during their business hours to hear a real person pick up. She did. She was polite. At the end of the chain, all of that carefully moved money became a monthly deposit into R's personal account at a private bank in Geneva. I sat with that for a while, then I ran the reverse. R sent money out too, slightly less than what came in, through a different set of companies in a different order but the same shape. 7 hops, 7 countries, clean paper at every step, out into another private account in a different name I couldn't quite pin down, without records I didn't have authority to pull, in and out, every month, for at least 3 years back, which was as far as my access went. The obvious first thought was tax evasion. That's what my brain wanted, because tax evasion I understood. The numbers were wrong for it. He was paying tax. He was declaring the income. He was paying tax on the way back out too. If anything, the structure cost him money to run. Legal fees alone on 7 jurisdictions eat into everything. You don't build a machine like that to save. You build a machine like that to hide the shape of what is moving through it. It was raining that afternoon, and I couldn't hear it because the windows on 34 don't open. I could see it. A wet gray sheet over the harbor. Ferries still running. I ate lunch at my desk, which I never do. I want to be clear that at this point, I hadn't done anything unusual. This is what auditors are supposed to notice. This is literally the job. I wrote a preliminary note, flagged the file, sent it to my manager, a guy I'll just call the manager because he was fine, but he was also very much a guy who liked to go home at 6. He read it the next morning. He came over to my desk with his coffee and said, "You sure about the reverse leg?" I said I was. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Write it up properly. Full memo. I'll walk it upstairs." That is not what he usually said. Usually he'd say, "Close it out, put it in the quarterly." When he said upstairs, I knew he meant the compliance officer, and when the compliance officer got involved, a file left our floor and did not come back. I spent 2 days on the memo. I put every counterparty in it. Auditors, license numbers, registered agents, directors where I could find them, addresses I cross-checked on Google Street View. Some were real offices with signs on the door, some were a 5th floor where the 5th floor was actually a currency exchange. Small details like that. I gave it to the manager on a Friday. On Monday, he told me it had gone to FinCEN through the proper channel and that I shouldn't talk to anyone about the file, including him, until further notice. He said it in a very normal voice, the same way he'd tell you the printer was jammed. For about 3 weeks nothing happened. I kept working other files. I went to a friend's birthday in Brooklyn. On the subway some nights, I would try to picture R, and I could never get past a suit. That was the part I couldn't shake. The whole structure implied a person who had thought about it carefully, and that person had a face and lived somewhere, and probably did school pickup like anyone else. In early December, 2 people came to our office who did not work at our firm. They spoke to the compliance officer for about an hour, then they asked to speak to me. The woman did most of the talking. She thanked me for the memo. She asked a few clarifying questions about how I got from the Rotterdam file to the Astana consultancy. She wrote things down in a small notebook, not on a laptop. Toward the end, she said, "We've had eyes on part of this for a while. Your work closed a gap we couldn't close from our side." I asked what the structure was for. I knew I probably wouldn't get an answer. I asked anyway. She looked at the man next to her. He looked back. Then she said, "I can tell you R is not the end of the chain. I can tell you the funds are not from tax fraud. What this structure supports is not something we can discuss with you, but I want you to understand the scale is significant and there are people affected." That was all she gave me. Scale is significant. People affected. I signed something. They left. That night, I took the ferry home instead of the subway because I wanted to be outside. Most of the deck was empty. I stood at the rail and thought about 7 clean companies in 7 clean countries and a monthly deposit into a Geneva account, and I thought about what people affected could cover. The honest answer is that it covers almost anything a person with real money would want kept quiet. I still work in the same building. I still open Monday files. For a while, when a new referral came in from a partner bank, I'd check the counterparties before I read the summary, just to see the shape first. I don't do that anymore. Most weeks. I don't know what R was paying for. I know they knew. They told me what they told me because they had to tell me something, and because it was easier to make me a little bit afraid than to explain. It worked. For the first month or so after that meeting, I didn't sleep well. I did home visits for elderly clients in New Orleans East for about 3 years, from 2017 through the middle of 2020. Most of my caseload was in these low-rise apartment complexes off Chef Mentir Highway, the ones that got hit hard by Katrina and never really came back the same. 2 floors, exterior walkways, iron railings, orange with rust. You'd knock on someone's door and hear the AC unit rattling through the wall before you heard the person. Roy was one of my clients from the spring of 2019. Late 70s, diabetic, 1 bad hip, wife passed in 2013. He lived on the 2nd floor of one of those complexes, apartment 2B. Very small place. Kitchen you could touch both walls of at the same time. He kept it tidy, but the carpet smelled like decades of cigarette smoke and menthol rub. First visit, he told me about the neighbor. "Fella next door checks on me every night," he said, real proud. Knocks on the wall, asks how I'm doing. I nodded and wrote it down. Clients say things. Roy was sharp on most days, but he had stretches where he'd mix up names, forget he'd taken his pills, that kind of thing. His daughter lived in Houston and called me twice a month to ask if he was still safe on his own. I told her yes because he was. Every visit after that, he'd mention the neighbor, not in a worried way. It was more like when someone tells you about their cat. Fond, routine. He's a good one. Knocks 3 times, always 3. Real polite about it. I asked once if he ever saw the neighbor in person. Roy thought about it and said no, not really. Kept to himself, worked odd hours maybe. I let it go. Half my clients had made up friends of one kind or another. Some talked to the TV. One woman off Downman Road had full conversations with a photograph of her son. You learn to just note it and move on. June that year was brutal. I remember because my car's AC gave out the second week, and I was doing visits with the windows down, sweat running into my eyes. I'd hit Roy's place around 4:30 most Wednesdays. Check his blood sugar, refill his weekly pill organizer, make sure the fridge had something in it besides ketchup and Coke. The Wednesday it happened, I was running late. I'd had a client on LC48 who fell in the bathroom, and I had to wait with her for EMS. By the time I got to Roy's, it was almost 5:30. I sat with him longer than usual because I felt bad, and because the traffic on I-10 back into the city was going to be miserable anyway. He was on the couch. I was in the kitchen chair he'd dragged out for me the first time I ever visited. The TV was on but muted. Some fishing show. The AC unit in the window was fighting to keep up and losing. We were talking about his daughter's kids when it happened. 3 knocks, not loud, not soft, even, spaced apart, like someone counting. Then a pause. Maybe 4 seconds. I remember counting because I didn't want to react before I understood what I was hearing. 3 more knocks, same wall, same spacing, same weight to them, like a knuckle on drywall from about waist height. Roy's whole face lit up. He turned his head toward the wall and he said, "There, you hear him? He always does that. Told you." I said something like, "Yeah, I hear him," and I kept my voice normal. I asked Roy if he wanted me to say hi through the wall on my way out. He laughed and said, "No, don't bother the man, he's just checking." I stayed maybe 15 more minutes. Nothing else came through the wall. When I left, I stood on the walkway outside 2A for a second and looked at the door. No welcome mat, no shoes outside. The little peephole had a spider web across it that hadn't been broken in a long time. I knocked, light, just to see. Nothing. I told myself I'd ask about it next visit. I asked the property manager instead. His office was in a converted storage room by the parking lot, and he had a box fan pointed straight at his face. "Big guy," name tag said Dwayne. I asked him about 2A. Who lived there? Were they around during the day? That kind of thing. He gave me a look I couldn't read at first. 2A's been empty since 2017, he said. Owner's estate never sorted itself out. Lawyers, it's locked up. Nobody's been in there but me and the roach guy. I asked if he was sure. He said he was very sure, because he had to run the AC in there once a month to keep the mold down, and he hated doing it. He offered to walk me over. He had a key ring the size of a grapefruit. He unlocked 2A right in front of me and pushed the door open. Hot, stale air came out, the kind of hot that's been sitting for weeks. The apartment was empty, not empty like someone had moved out yesterday. Empty like a place that had forgotten there was ever furniture in it. Marks on the carpet where a couch used to be. A calendar on the kitchen wall from October 2017. I asked which wall was shared with 2B. He pointed. It was a blank stretch of drywall between the kitchen and what would have been a bedroom. Nothing on it. No visible pipes. No vents. I stood there and put my hand flat against it. It was warm from the sun on the other side of the building. That was it. Dwayne locked up. I thanked him. I sat in my car for a while with the door open because inside it was worse than outside. On the drive back, I ran through it in my head. Old buildings settle. Pipes knock, especially with the water pressure out there. HVAC can do strange things when a unit kicks on 2 apartments over. Sound carries weird through cinder block and drywall. There are 100 normal reasons a wall makes noise in a building that's been standing since the 70s. I wrote my note that night. Client reports sounds from adjacent unit. Source unconfirmed. Client's effect stable, no signs of distress. Will continue to monitor. I kept visiting Roy through the rest of that summer and into the fall. His hip got worse. His daughter finally moved him to a place in Houston in October. I helped pack up 2B on his last day. He gave me a coffee can full of buttons his wife had collected. I still have it. Here's the part I don't put in any report. Every Wednesday after that first time, if I stayed past 5, I heard it. Not every visit. Only the late ones. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Always the same wall. Always about the same time of the afternoon, when the sun was going down on the west side of the building, and the shadow of the walkway railing cut across Roy's kitchen floor. Roy would smile and say the same thing every time. There he is. I stopped scheduling him early after a while. I don't know why. It felt rude somehow to cut the visit short. Like the neighbor was expecting me to be there too. The last visit before Houston, I stayed until almost 6. The knocks came twice that day. The second round was a little heavier. Roy was in the bathroom when it hit, and I was alone in the kitchen chair, and I did something I hadn't done before. I knocked back, 3 times on the same wall, about waist high. There was a pause. Longer than usual. Then 3 knocks came back, softer, from lower down, closer to the floor. I didn't tell Roy. I didn't write it down. I finished the visit, drove home, and sat in my driveway with the engine off until the mosquitoes got bad enough to make me go inside. Pipes, probably. That's what I put in the file. I had been working as a court interpreter in Dusseldorf for almost 9 years by that October, and I thought I had heard every version of a person trying to talk himself out of a room. The case was a fraud one, multi-episode, running about 11 counts. The defendant was Russian-speaking, mid-40s, well-dressed, the kind of man who irons his own shirts. I'll call him K, because that's how he was listed on my copy of the schedule. His lawyer sat next to him looking bored. The prosecutor was a woman I'd worked with before, thorough, no patience for showmanship. I don't want to say the courtroom was cold because it wasn't, but the ventilation always felt aggressive in that particular building on Werdener Strasse. You could hear it under everything, this dry rush of air coming from somewhere near the ceiling. I had my gray cardigan over my shoulders and my thermos of black tea sitting next to the microphone. Interpreting simultaneous testimony is a strange kind of work. You are not really listening as a person, you listen as a pipe. The words come in one language, you empty them, they come out the other side. If you start listening as yourself, you fall behind. You get maybe 2 seconds of internal life per minute, and you spend it on tea. Kay was a talker. Some defendants sit there like they're at the dentist. Kay spoke as if he had been waiting for the invitation. He gave long answers. He offered examples nobody had asked for. His lawyer kept touching his sleeve, and Kay kept ignoring him. The judge let it run, because parts of it were useful to the prosecution, and she wanted him on record. Around the second hour, he started explaining what he called the psychology of the middle-income European client. He said his schemes worked because he understood how these people lived, what they trusted, what they didn't check twice. Take a typical apartment, he said in Russian. I translated. 4th floor, older building, wooden floors that squeak in 2 places, one near the kitchen doorway, one by the bathroom. I translated it. My voice did not change. The kitchen is narrow, a small table for 2 under the window. The window looks out onto a courtyard with 3 chestnut trees and a bike rack that is always half empty. I translated it. My hand stayed on the desk. I live on the 4th floor of an older building. My floor squeaks in 2 places. There are 3 chestnut trees in my courtyard. The bike rack is bolted to the wall on the left side, and most days there are 2 bikes on it, sometimes 3. He kept going. He described the arrangement of a living room. A dark green sofa against the long wall, a framed print above it, some kind of city map, Prague or Vienna, they all buy the same thing. My print is of Vienna, 1858. I bought it at a flea market in Nordstadt. I translated it. I translated it into German, into the microphone, in a voice that sounded like mine. The prosecutor was taking notes. The judge was watching Kay. The stenographer was typing. Nobody in that room knew what my kitchen looked like except me and apparently Kay. He never once looked at me. He looked at the prosecutor, at the ceiling, at his own hands. He was performing the way clever people perform when they want to be underestimated. My job was to keep up. There is a rule they teach you at the school in Germersheim. If something goes wrong personally during an assignment, you finish the sentence you're on, and then you signal. You don't stop in the middle of a translation. You don't editorialize. You are a pipe. The pipe does not get to have feelings until the water is through, so I translated the sofa. I translated the print. I translated the detail about the small ceramic bowl on the shelf by the door, where these people always leave their keys because they think a bowl is elegant. I have that bowl. It's from a market in Portugal. My mother bought it for me in 2016. My throat got dry in a very specific way, the way it gets when you realize you have swallowed something and don't remember doing it. I took a sip from the thermos in the pause between his sentences. The tea was still warm. That helped in a way I can't really explain. Kay moved on. He started talking about a different scheme involving pensioners in North Rhine-Westphalia. The apartment example was over. He never returned to it. It had lasted maybe 4 minutes. At the break, I went out into the corridor with my folder and stood by the window at the end of the hallway. The window looked down onto Werdener Strasse. A tram was stopped at the light. A woman in a beige coat was arguing with someone on the phone. I remember thinking, in a very calm way, that I did not want to go home that evening. I did not want to walk into my kitchen and see the table under the window from a new angle. I went back in and finished the session. 3 more hours. He talked about bank transfers, shell companies in Cyprus, a man he'd worked with in Hamburg. My translation was clean. I checked it later against the recording. There was nothing in my voice. After the judge closed the session, I waited by the prosecutor's table while she put her papers away. I asked quietly, in German, if we could speak for a minute in her office. She looked at me for half a second longer than she needed to, and then she nodded. In her office, I told her what he described and why it mattered. I described my apartment. I described his description. I laid them next to each other. She wrote it all down in a small notebook she kept in her jacket pocket, not on the case file. She asked me if I had ever been threatened. I said no. She asked if I'd ever spoken about my apartment in a professional setting. I said no. She asked who had my home address. I listed them: the tax office, my landlord, 2 colleagues, my sister. She was quiet for a while. Then she said K had contacts outside the prison. 2 of the co-defendants had never been arrested. The investigation had reason to believe the network was larger than the indictment suggested. She said the police could offer me temporary alternative housing while the trial ran and for a period afterward. She said it in a very even voice, the way you'd tell someone their car was blocking a driveway. I said yes. I packed a bag that night. I stayed with my sister for 3 days and then in a serviced flat in Oberkassel for almost 4 months. My mail went to a P.O. box. I kept working other cases. I did not go back to that trial. Another interpreter took over the following week. The official reason on file was scheduling. K was convicted on 9 of the 11 counts and received a sentence in the higher single digits. His appeal failed. The description of the apartment was never entered into the record. It wasn't relevant to any charge, and the prosecutor decided, and I agreed, that putting it in writing anywhere accessible was worse than leaving it out. I moved, not immediately, and not because anyone told me I had to. I moved about a year later to a different part of the city, into a building with an intercom and a proper front door. The chestnut trees were the hardest thing to give up. My mother's bowl is on a shelf by the door of the new place. Different door, same bowl. Sometimes I get assigned a Russian language case, and I check the defendant's name on the schedule before I confirm. I have never seen his again, but I check every time. And we step away from the edge back towards something almost normal again. Thanks for being here until the very end. That takes guts. Which thread got under your defenses? Tell the comments below. The archive never sleeps. Always more content to pull from. Keep alert. Next time's coming faster than you think.